how important is it for folks of the left to delineate only, and I know that you don't think it's a helpful thing to do, but how important is it to delineate in the context of being able to say we are entering into a coalition with the Democrats, the unions, whatever it is, to achieve X, Y, and Z? I mean, because I think we're seeing that in the context of, we see it in the House. Like, we can track sort of like the squad, and there are compromises that they're making that are ostensibly, to build legislative coalitions, I guess, that will hopefully pay off in the future. Like, how much of that, where is the left in that sort of like, who are we going to build a coalition with, and how limited will that be, and to what ends?
I think the best example of that in recent memory is 2020, and the way that people really came together to get Trump out, right? Because there are the Democratic Party, I said in the book that some people were actively, a small sort of subset of people were actively excited about Joe Biden and electing Joe Biden. I don't think that was a very broad group. I think most people who came together to defeat Trump just wanted to defeat Trump, just wanted to get him out of the White House. And that was the sort of necessary condition. Any leftist organizer would tell you, we've got to get rid of that guy first before we can really get anything else done. And we saw groups like Pennsylvania Stands Up in Pennsylvania, and they organized, they had a very interesting model of doing this, where they sent people door to door. And I think it really made a tremendous difference there. And I think they really helped Biden win in Pennsylvania. And they said to people, we want you to vote for Biden for this reason and that reason. We don't think he's very good. We think we deserve more and better. But it's very important in this election that you vote for Joe Biden. I think you can have this kind of dual track approach on a lot of these issues. And particularly when we're locked into a duopoly, which we are for now, right? I think that to me, I don't see any signs that we're going to have a viable third party anytime soon in American politics. These are the conditions we're fighting in. This is the terrain we're fighting on. And there's a way to do it where we can be honest with people about what we believe, where we're coming from, and what we think, the vision of the world that we think we could have, while at the same time saying, as an intermediary step, we're joining with this or that group or with the Democratic Party and trying to get, this particular thing done or this particular person elected. And that's the way you do it, I think.
You write specifically about Pennsylvania in the book, and you're talking about that dynamic. And I don't know, I can't remember the last time we've had two Democratic senators from Pennsylvania. It's been, I think, a long while. And what does Pennsylvania show in terms of, and we should say, you wrote this, you were doing the reporting on this over a year ago in Pennsylvania, when, the idea that John Fetterman could be the senator there was, I don't think it was an obvious something that would happen. What does Pennsylvania show you about, or us, I guess, about where the left is going in this country?
I think, Fetterman was a really great and exciting example of somebody who talked about economic issues, who talked about everyday sort of economic concerns shared by a lot of people in this country, and did it effectively. And he ran against somebody also who was just sort of comically out of touch and ridiculous. And one thing we saw from the midterms is this, and this was not just in Pennsylvania, but nationally, a rejection of the Republican candidates as the real extremists, right? I mean, you hear over and over again that the Democrats are going to be punished because they've gone too far left and people don't like defund the police, or they don't like abortion on demand, or all of these things that the party is not actually supporting, which is sort of a separate point. But they've, successfully in some ways tarred the Democrats as supporters of these things. And what we actually saw is that, in fact, voters don't like people like Blake Masters, who's like a totally creepy fascist gun nut in Arizona. Nobody likes that. They don't like what the GOP is selling. And I think that was to me, the biggest message and the most interesting outcome of the midterms. They ran, is that the people the GOP ran were singularly unappealing, not just as in their policy positions, but also kind of personally bad candidates. And John Fetterman is the opposite of that. He's a good candidate. He's a personally appealing person, a guy who attracted people's attention in a good way. And he won on talking about, issues that people care about.
The interesting thing about that is that I think makes that dynamic, you compare it to, let's say, Ohio, right? Is that Fetterman made a joke out of Oz, but the narrative that he made a joke out of him was sort of like the opposite side of the coin of what Fetterman delivered or attempted to deliver, which is like, I understand the issues that you have in, your kitchen table issues and what you struggle with on a daily basis. And not coincidentally, he had already defined Oz as someone who was so out of touch, like both in terms of like, he doesn't even live here. And in fact, where he ultimately lives is like, in some other stratosphere of celebrity doctorhood. That both sides of that narrative matched each other in a way that like was extremely helpful. It seems like that. I don't know what Tim Ryan was doing in Ohio, and Ohio may be just a different instance. But, you could have applied that same sort of dynamic to J.D. Vance with what Tim Ryan seemed to be running on. He didn't quite get there with that. And it really wasn't so much about, it was much more grounded in, like, Fetterman seemed to localize that race in a way that is difficult to do in like politics for senators. And I know that's interesting. And so where does the left go next? I mean, like, is it just maintaining some of the same track, or is it like what? Like, how does it grow at this point? Because it feels like, the DSA exploded during, in the wake of the Bernie run. But it seems like, when Bernie lost in 2020, there was a lot of fracturing, and some of the message was absorbed by Democratic politicians, increasingly, but maybe incrementally more so. But what is happening on the left right now? And where's the path forward?
I mean, these are really good questions, and I'm thinking a lot about them. I think that Sunrise is a good example of an organization that is pretty new still, that had a lot of success and generated a lot of really impressive headlines, 2018, 2019. And we don't have a Green New Deal, and that's sort of, I'm not going to say that it's run out of steam. I think they are making measurable progress on that, but there's they've sort of hit a little bit of a wall. And I know that they're internally as an organization going through a big kind of reckoning now and trying to figure out where do we go forward from here. DSA is in a similar place. And I think that I would say that in some ways, the left is sort of plateauing. I don't think it's losing steam, but I think we're at a point where we're trying to figure out how do we level up and get through to the next, the next big jump. And I don't know exactly what's going to happen with that. I think one thing that gives me a lot of hope about it is that the reason we have this prominent left now in a way that we certainly didn't when I was coming of age in the 90s is that people have gotten more serious about being strategic and thinking about how power works, right? So I was a big Nader person in college. I loved Ralph Nader, really admired him. I got involved with the campaign. He got less than 3% of the vote nationwide, right? That was not a success. That campaign was not in any way a success. The Green Party was not particularly a success. And what we're doing now is seeing, in 2020, Bernie Sanders became the only person in American history to get the person who called himself a socialist who got the closest ever to the American presidency, right? And that was pretty remarkable for anyone who's been alive for, longer than 30 years. And that was a big moment. And that didn't happen by accident. That didn't happen overnight. That happened because of years of groundwork and trying to figure out how you can, break through against all odds and against institutions that are all sort of aligned against you. So that's where we are now. But the good news is that people are thinking about it in a much more serious way than I think that they were even 10 or 20 years ago.